Widow fled burning town with 3 children, but returned with a loaded rifle. The sun was slowly climbing above the horizon, spilling golden light over the small town of Maplewood. It was a quiet town, where everyone knew everyone else, and life moved at a steady, predictable pace. Streets were lined with modest wooden homes, some painted in faded pastels, others with peeling paint showing years of care and weather. Children ran barefoot on dusty paths, laughing and shouting as their parents tended to chores, and merchants opened their shops calling out greetings to familiar faces. Life had a rhythm here, calm and comforting, and the townsfolk took pride in their routines. In the center of this town lived Clara Bennett, a widow in her early 30s with 3 young children, Ella, 7, Thomas, 5, and little Sophie, who had just turned 3. Clara's husband Henry had passed away 2 years earlier from a sudden illness. Since then, she had learned to manage everything on her own, cooking, cleaning, managing their small garden, and making sure the children were safe and cared for. Life had been hard, but she faced it with quiet courage, a strength born from love and necessity. Her children were her world, and she never let them feel the weight of their loss. Clara's mornings began early, even before the sun fully rose. She would light the small stove in their kitchen and make breakfast, often bread toasted with a little butter and honey, and pour milk for the children. As they ate, she talked to them about the day ahead, about school, errands, or little adventures in the town. Despite the hardships, she always smiled, her voice gentle and comforting, creating a sense of security that her children clung to. Even little Sophie, who often woke with tears, felt a calm warmth when held in her mother's arms. That morning, Clara noticed the wind carried a different smell. It was faint at first, a dry, acrid scent that made her pause and glance at the horizon. Smoke, she thought, frowning slightly. The town had a small fire brigade, but fires were rare. Maybe someone was burning trash too early in the morning. She shook the thought away, returning to serving breakfast. Her children were chattering about their small joys. Ella with a new ribbon in her hair, Thomas showing a little toy horse he had found, and Sophie clapping her tiny hands at the playful antics. For a moment the worry melted. After breakfast, Clara dressed the children, tying their hair and making sure shoes were on properly. She gave them warm hugs, whispering encouragement, and sent them off to play in the yard while she stepped outside to check the garden. The roses she had planted last spring were blooming beautifully, and the small vegetable patch promised fresh greens for the week. Clara inhaled the crisp morning air, feeling a rare moment of peace. She glanced toward the town square and noticed a few neighbors walking briskly, talking in low voices. Something in their expressions made her pause. She couldn't place it at first, but there was a tension in the air, subtle yet unmistakable, a quiet unease that clung to the morning like a shadow. Clara shook her head. Perhaps it was nothing. Life in Maplewood had been peaceful for so long it was hard to imagine danger reaching them. Still, her instincts were sharp. She had learned over the years that danger often arrived when least expected. She called her children inside, just to be safe, telling them they could play after chores. Ella and Thomas nodded obediently, while little Sophie clung to her mother's side, sensing the seriousness in Clara's tone. As the morning passed, the wind grew stronger, rustling the leaves and carrying the scent of smoke again. This time, it was stronger, unmistakable. Clara's heart began to race. She left the children playing and walked toward the street. From the edge of town, she saw a flicker of orange against the sky, rising above the rooftops. At first, she thought it might be the sun reflecting off a window, but the movement told a different story. Flames. Smoke curling upward, thick and black. Panic had not yet set in for the town, but fear was spreading like wildfire in Clara's chest. She ran toward the source, her children following close behind. The flames were coming from the northern side of the town, where several wooden homes sat close together. Sparks leaped from one roof to another, carried by the dry wind. The heat hit Clara's face as she approached, and she realized this was no small fire. It was a disaster. Neighbors shouted to each other, forming small groups to try and fight the fire with buckets of water. But the wind was relentless, spreading the blaze faster than anyone could contain. Clara's mind raced. She had to protect her children. She grabbed Ella's hand and Thomas's, lifting Sophie into her arms. Her heart pounded with urgency, but she forced herself to stay calm. Panic would only make things worse. They ran toward the outskirts, away from the flames and falling debris. Clara guided her children through narrow alleys, past burning fences and smoldering piles of wood. The noise of the fire, the crackling, the roaring, the shouting of townsfolk, was overwhelming, but she focused on her children's safety, repeating in her mind, "We will make it. We will make it."
Along the way they passed other families fleeing their homes.
Some carried pets, others clutched belongings, but all eyes were wide with fear. Clara recognized neighbors she had known for years, people she had shared meals and stories with, now running for their lives. For a moment the reality struck her. This fire was consuming not just homes, but a way of life, memories, and security. Finally, they reached the edge of town. The fields beyond provided open space, and the flames seemed a little more distant here. Clara set Sophie down gently, letting her toddler legs touch the grass. She hugged Ella and Thomas close, feeling the warmth of their small bodies against her own. They were safe, for now. The town was burning behind them, smoke thickening the sky, and the sound of crackling wood filled the air. Clara's chest heaved, but she refused to give in to despair. She knew she needed a plan, a way forward, and a way to protect her children from the uncertainty that lay ahead. As she sat there, catching her breath, she realized something important. She would not allow this disaster to define them. She would not run forever, hiding from fear. Somehow, she would return. Somehow she would face whatever had caused this destruction. But for now she had to ensure her children survived, and that meant staying vigilant, staying together, and staying alive. The children, exhausted and frightened, clung to their mother. Ella's eyes were wide, reflecting the orange glow in the distance. Thomas's hands trembled slightly, and Sophie's small face was streaked with tears. Clara held them tightly, whispering comforting words, telling them stories of courage and bravery to distract them from the horror around them. Though the town behind them was lost to the flames, Clara's resolve hardened. She was a widow, yes, but she was not powerless. She had her children, her mind, and her determination. And in that moment, as the smoke filled the sky and the sun climbed higher, she made a silent promise. She would protect her family, reclaim what was theirs, and face the danger that had forced them to flee. The fire might have destroyed the town, but it could not destroy Clara's spirit. With her children close, hearts beating fast, she began to plan her next steps. She didn't yet know what lay ahead, but one thing was certain: she would not let fear rule them. She would survive. And one day she would return to Maplewood, not as a fleeing widow, but as a mother determined to stand strong in the face of devastation. The smoke from Maplewood hung heavy in the air, curling into thick dark clouds that blocked the rising sun. Clara's heart still raced from the escape, but there was no time to pause. Her children were frightened, trembling against her body, and the fire behind them roared like a wild beast, consuming everything they had known. She glanced back one last time. The town she had called home now barely recognizable through the haze. Houses she had passed daily, shops she had visited, streets where she had walked with Henry, all swallowed by flames. She felt a pang of loss, but there was no time to grieve, not yet. Survival came first. Clara led her children across the open fields beyond the town. The tall grasses whipped against her legs as she ran, the air heavy with smoke and ash. She held Sophie close, her small body pressed against Clara's chest, while her other hand gripped Thomas's tiny hand. Ella walked beside her, doing her best to stay brave for her younger siblings, but Clara could see the fear in her eyes. Each step forward was a battle against panic, against exhaustion, against the terror that threatened to overtake them. After some distance, Clara found a small grove of trees. She guided the children into the shade, crouching behind the trunks to catch their breath. Sophie whimpered softly, and Clara rubbed her back, whispering, "It's okay, little one. We are safe for now. Mama is here." Thomas's eyes were wide with tears, and Ella's hand trembled as she held her little brother close. Clara felt the weight of her children pressing against her. physical and emotional, and she knew she had to stay strong, no matter how scared she was herself. As they rested, Clara scanned the horizon. The town was still burning in the distance, smoke rising in great pillars that marked the destruction. She knew they could not stay here forever. There were no nearby homes, no neighbors to help, and the wind threatened to carry embers into the field where they were hiding. They needed water, food, and shelter, and most importantly, a safe place away from the fire. She took a deep breath, steadying herself, and began to think through their next steps. Clara led her children through the fields towards a small stream she remembered from earlier walks with Henry. It was several miles away, but it offered water and the chance to wash away some of the soot and ash from their faces. The journey was slow. Sophie's little legs were weak, and she often had to be carried. Thomas stumbled over rocks, and Ella's feet were blistered from running. Clara's own muscles ached, but she pushed through the pain, refusing to let her children sense her exhaustion. Every so often she would pause to let them rest, whispering words of encouragement. By midday, they reached the stream. Clara knelt beside the water, letting her children drink and splash a little on their faces. The cool water refreshed them, washing away some of the grime from the fire, and for a brief moment, the world felt less frightening. Clara's heart still thudded with fear, but she allowed herself a moment of relief. She had gotten them this far. They were alive, and that was something worth holding on to. While the children played cautiously near the water, Clara thought about what had caused the fire. Rumors had reached her ears before the disaster. Talk of a gang of outlaws moving through neighboring areas, of disputes and unrest. Could they have been responsible? She shivered at the thought, but knew there was no use dwelling on blame right now. Survival demanded focus, not anger. Her mind turned to the practical matters ahead, finding shelter, food, and a way to protect her children. Clara remembered an old cabin on the edge of the woods, abandoned for years, but still standing. She had walked past it with Henry during a picnic once. It was a risk, traveling farther, but staying in the open fields would be far worse. She gathered the children and set off again, moving cautiously. The terrain was uneven, filled with roots and rocks, and the children stumbled often. Clara steadied them, holding hands, lifting Sophie when her small legs could go no further. The journey was exhausting, but Clara refused to stop. As they neared the cabin, the sunlight fell through the trees, casting long shadows that danced across the forest floor. Clara's heart lifted slightly. The structure was still intact. She led her children inside, checking for signs of danger. There were no animals, no intruders, just the remnants of the past, old furniture, a fireplace filled with cold ashes, and walls scarred by time. Clara quickly made a small bed from old blankets and straw, giving the children a place to rest while she explored for supplies. Inside the cabin, Clara found a few broken tools and some old containers. She cleaned what she could use and fashioned a small area to prepare food. The children were curious, touching and exploring everything cautiously, while Clara worked quietly. She filled a pot with water from the stream and lit a small fire in the fireplace, careful not to let it grow too large. Soon, she had a simple meal ready. Some foraged berries and boiled roots, not much, but enough to give them energy. They ate in silence, each bite a small comfort against the overwhelming fear. Night fell, bringing with it an eerie quiet. Clara huddled with her children, telling them stories of bravery of heroes who faced great dangers but emerged strong. She wanted to instill hope, even in such a terrifying time. Sophie's small hands clutched hers tightly as she drifted off to sleep, while Thomas and Ella rested against her, exhaustion overtaking fear for a few hours. Clara sat quietly, listening to the wind rustling through the trees, her mind racing with thoughts of the town, the fire, and what tomorrow might bring. As she stared at the darkened forest outside the cabin, Clara made a decision. They could not run forever. The town might be lost, but she would return one day, not as a frightened widow fleeing disaster, but as a mother determined to reclaim what had been taken from them. She thought about the items left behind, the family belongings, the small shop her husband had helped her manage, the familiar streets filled with memories. Some might never be recovered, but her family's safety was paramount, and that would always come first. Sleep eventually came, fitful and shallow, but it allowed Clara to rest enough to continue. When dawn broke, she awoke to the sound of birds and the gentle rustle of leaves. The children were still sleeping, their small bodies curled safely beneath the blankets. Clara stretched and looked out the cabin window, taking stock of their surroundings. She knew the next day would be hard. They needed a more permanent solution, a place where they could survive for weeks if necessary. They packed what little they had, tying their belongings into a bundle, and gently woke the children. Breakfast was simple, berries and water, but it was enough. Clara encouraged them to eat quickly, reminding them that staying strong meant keeping their bodies nourished. She explained in soft but firm tones that they would continue moving, finding a safer place, and that together they could face anything. The journey continued, Clara leading them along hidden paths and through the forest. They avoided the main roads, wary of strangers or lingering danger from the fire. Clara's knowledge of the land, gained from years of walks and errands, guided them safely. The children followed closely, learning to move quietly, to watch their step, and to trust their mother's judgment. Despite exhaustion and fear, there was a growing sense of unity. Clara and her children facing adversity together. By midday, they discovered a small clearing with a fresh water source and a patch of wild berries. Clara allowed the children a short rest, letting them gather berries and drink from the clear stream. She watched them carefully, ensuring no danger lurked nearby. It was here that Clara's determination truly solidified. She realized that survival meant more than avoiding fire. It meant preparing, planning, and if necessary, taking action to defend her family. Though the fire had taken their home, Clara's spirit had not been broken. She comforted her children, shared stories of courage, and began to teach them small lessons in resilience. Each step forward was a victory, each safe night a triumph. Clara knew the path ahead would be long and uncertain, but she was ready to face it for the sake of her children. And as the sun began to dip below the horizon, she held them close, whispering promises of safety, hope, and a future where they could rebuild what had been lost. After several days of moving through the forest and sleeping in small clearings, Clara began to feel the weight of responsibility more heavily than ever. The initial adrenaline from escaping the fire had faded, replaced by a gnawing exhaustion and the constant worry about her children. They had water, a few berries, and whatever small supply she had managed to carry, but the uncertainty of where to go next pressed on her mind. She had kept them alive so far, but surviving was not enough. She needed a plan, a safe place for them, and a way to protect her family from the dangers that might still linger in the world. Clara's children had begun to understand, in small ways, the seriousness of their situation. Ella, the eldest, tried to act grown up, helping to gather berries or encouraging her younger siblings. Thomas had begun to show a quiet obedience, following his mother's directions without question, though she could see the worry etched into his small face. Sophie, the youngest, clung to Clara constantly, sensing the fear in her mother's heart but trusting her instinctively. Watching them, Clara realized that she had to remain strong, not just for her own survival, but to give them hope. Each morning, Clara woke early, tending to the children and checking their small temporary camp. She would fill whatever container she had with water from the nearby stream, cook a small meal of roots or berries, and organize their belongings. Even with so little, she made sure that the children were comfortable as possible under the circumstances. She talked to them softly, telling stories of brave women and mothers who had faced hardship, and in these stories she tried to give them courage to match her own. During these days, Clara had time to think about the fire and the town. The image of maple wood burning still haunted her. She had no way of knowing what had caused it for certain, perhaps a careless mistake, perhaps something more sinister, but the thought that it could have been a deliberate act filled her with unease. She had to prepare for all possibilities. If there were people responsible for the destruction, she would need to protect her children when they returned. This realization brought clarity and a new kind of determination. She could not allow fear to control her. She would reclaim their lives, piece by piece, and she would do it on her own terms. One afternoon, after a morning spent gathering edible plants and water, Clara sat down with the children under a large oak tree. Ella rested her head against Clara's shoulder. Thomas held her hand tightly, and little Sophie sat in her lap, picking at leaves and small twigs. Clara spoke to them gently, explaining that they were going to need patience and courage. "We have been very brave," she said, "and I am proud of each of you. But the most important thing is to stay together. We will find a safe place, and one day we may go back to Maplewood." The children listened, their wide eyes absorbing her words. Clara knew they might not fully understand yet, but the seed of resilience had been planted. She had to make sure they believed in her strength and in their own. She told them that being brave didn't mean never feeling fear. It meant facing fear and moving forward anyway. She encouraged them to talk about what scared them, and she would listen. It became a small ritual each evening, sharing their worries and hopes before falling asleep under the sheltering trees. Clara's days were filled with practical survival tasks. She scavenged for roots and berries, using knowledge passed down from her husband and her own childhood in the countryside. She found small herbs that could be eaten, and she discovered places where wild berries grew plentifully. She boiled water in a small pot she had carried, teaching Ella how to do the same under her careful supervision. She set up small routines: gather water, cook a simple meal, let the children rest and play safely, and plan their next move. Clara had to be constantly alert for potential danger: wild animals, unstable terrain, and even strangers who might wander into the forest. She kept a stick handy to defend herself if needed, and she watched the children carefully, making sure no one wandered too far. She realized that while they were physically safe in the forest, the real challenge was preparing for the world beyond it. One day, they would need to leave this temporary sanctuary. One day, she would need to face the town, or whatever remained of it. During one quiet afternoon, as Clara sat by the stream watching the children play, she made a crucial decision. It was not enough to survive. She needed a plan to reclaim what had been lost. She thought of the town and the small home they had fled from. Though the buildings had been destroyed, the land was still theirs, and memories of their life there could guide her. She would need to return, and when she did, she would need a way to protect her family. This was when the idea of the rifle came to her. Not for violence, but for protection, a means to ensure safety in a world that had shown her how quickly everything could be taken away. Clara began to teach herself patience and planning. Each day she observed the terrain around their temporary camp. She mapped paths through the forest in her mind, noting streams, clearings, and possible shelters. She practiced moving silently with her children, teaching them to follow her quietly and watchfully. She thought about the tools and items they would need when they returned to the town. Perhaps some belongings could be salvaged. Perhaps the land could still provide food and shelter. Every detail mattered, and she took careful notes in her memory, planning each step meticulously. As the days passed, Clara found a rhythm, a balance between care for her children and preparation for the future. She let them play near the stream, teaching them small lessons about observing nature and staying aware of their surroundings. She encouraged Ella to help care for Sophie and Thomas, fostering responsibility and teamwork among the children. Though their lives had been disrupted, Clara was determined to instill a sense of purpose and resilience. They were not merely fleeing from danger. They were learning, growing, and preparing for what was to come. At night, she would often stay awake long after the children had fallen asleep. She stared into the darkened forest, listening to the wind in the trees, imagining the town, and planning the steps she would take when they returned. She considered the possibility that the town might be unsafe, that dangers could still lurk among the ruins. She envisioned herself walking through the streets, protecting her children, reclaiming whatever could be salvaged, and standing strong against whatever threat remained. Each night, this vision strengthened her resolve, replacing fear with the determination. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, Clara gathered the children around the small fire she had built. She spoke to them about courage, about hope, and about the power of standing together. "One day," she said softly, "we may return to Maplewood. It may be different, it may be hard, but together we can face anything, and I promise We will be ready." The children listened, their eyes wide, trusting their mother's words. In that moment, Clara knew she had given them more than food and shelter. She had given them the strength to endure, the confidence that they were not helpless. Over the next few days, Clara continued her routine, combining survival with careful preparation for the day they would return to the town. She observed the weather, the movement of animals, and the paths she might take. She taught her children to stay close, to recognize dangers, and to remain calm even when frightened. Each day brought small victories. Finding a hidden patch of berries, discovering a safe path through thorny brush, keeping the children calm during sudden noises in the forest. These small accomplishments built confidence and resilience, preparing them for the challenges that lay ahead. Clara also began to reflect on her own strength. She realized that the fire, as devastating as it was, had revealed her capacity for courage, resourcefulness, and leadership. She had protected her children, guided them through danger, and maintained hope even when the world seemed to collapse around them. This self-awareness strengthened her determination to return to the town, not as a victim, but as a protector, a mother ready to face whatever challenges awaited. By the end of the week, Clara's plan began to take shape in her mind. She would return to Maplewood, carefully, with the children safe and prepared. She would gather whatever tools and resources they needed, reclaim what she could, and ensure their safety. And she would do it with courage, planning, and a resolve that the fire and fear could not destroy. Each step forward, each small decision, was a step toward reclaiming their lives. The days in the forest had given Clara time to recover, to gather her strength, and to think clearly about the future. Her children were slowly adjusting to the rhythm of survival, learning to be careful, to help when needed, and to trust their mother's judgment. But Clara knew that staying hidden forever was not an option. Maplewood, the town that had been their home, was still out there, waiting. Its streets burned, its homes destroyed, and perhaps danger still lurking among the ruins. One morning as the sun filtered through the trees, Clara made a firm decision. They would return to Maplewood. She would not go as a frightened widow, running from danger. She would go prepared, ready to protect her children, and ready to face whatever challenges remained. The thought of the town, the loss of their home, and the need to reclaim what had been taken gave her determination she had never felt before. She began to plan meticulously, considering every detail, the route, possible dangers, and the tools they would need. The first step was the rifle. Clara had found one in the cabin days before, hidden behind an old wooden chest. It was dusty and slightly rusted, but it could still be used for protection. She spent time cleaning it carefully, making sure it was safe and functional. She had never used a rifle before, but she studied it, turning it over in her hands, learning the mechanisms, and imagining how it could keep her family safe. It was not a weapon for attack. It was a tool, a symbol of her determination, a way to ensure that no one could threaten her children again. Next, Clara gathered supplies. She packed dried berries, roots, and whatever small provisions she had for the journey back. She found containers for water, tied the children's few belongings in bundles, and prepared blankets and clothing for warmth. She made sure each child had something to hold on to, a small toy or a piece of clothing that reminded them of home. These small comforts would help them stay calm and hopeful during the journey. Clara also studied the terrain. She remembered the paths she had taken during their escape, the hidden streams, the dense brush that could provide cover, and the open fields they would need to cross cautiously. She planned each step, teaching Ella and Thomas how to move quietly, how to watch for danger, and how to stay close. Sophie, still too young to fully understand, clung to her mother, but Clara made her feel safe, whispering softly and keeping her in sight at all times. By the third day of preparation, Clara felt ready. She gathered the children and spoke to them gently but firmly. "We are going back to Maplewood," she said. "It may be different from what we remember. It may be hard, but we will be together, and we will face it. You are brave, and I am proud of you." The children listened, wide-eyed, some afraid, but trusting her completely. They had learned to follow her lead, and they had learned that their mother's courage was stronger than fear. Clara packed the last of their supplies into small bundles, securing them with ropes and cloth. She slung the rifle across her back, careful to keep it ready but safe. She checked on the children one last time, making sure they had eaten, drank water, and were rested. Ella clutched a small ribbon Clara had tied in her hair. Thomas held the small carved wooden horse. Sophie clutched Clara's hand tightly. They were ready, or as ready as children could be, to face the uncertain journey ahead. The journey back began cautiously. Clara led them through hidden paths in the forest, avoiding main roads and open fields where they could be seen. She kept a careful watch on the surroundings, listening for unusual sounds, watching for signs of people or animals. Each step was deliberate, quiet, and measured. The children followed closely, imitating her movements, learning to stay alert. The air smelled faintly of smoke still, a reminder of the town's destruction. Clara's heart ached at the thought of what they might find, but she forced herself to stay focused on the task at hand.
As they moved closer to Maplewood, the landscape began to change.
Trees became sparse, and the distant outlines of buildings appeared through the haze. The town was quiet, eerily quiet, except for the occasional crackle of smoldering wood. Clara's heart pounded, but she did not show fear. She adjusted the rifle on her back, reminded the children to stay close, and moved forward step by step. When they reached the edge of the town, Clara stopped. The destruction was worse than she had imagined. Houses were reduced to charred skeletons. Shops were gutted and the streets were littered with debris. Smoke still rose in thin columns from some of the rubble, and the smell of ash hung in the air. Clara felt a surge of sadness and anger, but she pushed it aside. She had come to reclaim safety for her children, not to dwell on loss. She led the children carefully through the streets, keeping to the shadows of the ruined buildings. The silence was broken only by the occasional creak of a collapsing structure or the distant caw of a bird. Clara scanned every corner, every doorway, every pile of rubble. She could not be certain what dangers remained, looters, wild animals, or unstable structures, but she moved with caution, ensuring the children stayed close and hidden. As they progressed, Clara spotted a few signs of human presence: footprints in the ash, remnants of recently abandoned belongings, and a small fire that had been used to cook food. Someone had been here, but they were gone now. Clara's heart raced. The town might not be completely empty, and she had to be prepared to protect her children if anyone appeared. She whispered instructions to them. "Stay quiet, stay behind me, and do not run unless I tell you to."
They nodded, understanding the seriousness of the situation. Clara began searching the buildings that had once been their neighbors' homes.
Some had been completely destroyed, but a few had walls still standing. She carefully inspected each one, checking for hidden dangers or usable supplies. She found a small pantry in one home with a few cans of preserved food, which she took carefully. Another house had a blanket and some tools that could be useful. Every item she found she stored carefully, adding to their small bundles. The children watched quietly, learning from their mother's careful movements. Ella helped pick up items that were safe to carry. Thomas followed closely, and Sophie stayed in Clara's arms. Clara taught them how to move carefully, how to observe their surroundings, and how to think before acting. And she knew these skills could save their lives if danger appeared. As they moved deeper into the town, Clara came to the small store she had once visited with Henry. The front was destroyed, the windows shattered, and the shelves were bare. But she noticed something: a small locked cabinet that had survived the fire. Using a piece of wood she found nearby, she pried it open carefully. Inside were a few items that had survived: canned goods, a small knife, and a few tools. Clara smiled slightly. These small finds would help them survive longer, and gave her a sense of accomplishment. By the time the sun began to set, Clara and her children had moved carefully through several blocks of the ruined town. They had found a relatively safe building with walls still standing and a roof partially intact. Clara cleaned the area as best as she could, set up their small blankets, and organized their bundles. The children were exhausted, but they trusted their mother completely. Clara whispered words of encouragement, assuring them that they were safe for the night. As she watched the children settle, Clara reflected on their journey. They had come a long way, from fleeing the fire, surviving in the forest, and now returning to the town that had once been their home. Each step had required courage, careful planning, and resilience. Clara realized that this was only the beginning. There would be more challenges ahead, but she felt ready. She had her children, her wits, and her determination. She had the rifle, not as a weapon to harm, but as a tool to protect. Night fell, and the town was quiet except for the occasional crack of smoldering wood or the rustle of a small animal. Clara held her children close, feeling the warmth of their small bodies against hers. She whispered promises of safety and hope, teaching them that courage was not the absence of fear, but the ability to act in spite of it. Sleep came slowly, but they rested, their trust in her providing comfort and security. In that quiet night, Clara made another silent promise to herself. She would ensure the safety of her children. She would reclaim whatever could be saved from the town, and she would do it with strength, courage, and careful planning. The journey had been difficult, but it had prepared her for the challenges ahead, and as the stars shone above the ruined town, Clara's resolve was unshakable. The sun rose slowly over the ruins of Maplewood, casting a pale light on the charred remains of homes, shops, and streets that had once been familiar and full of life. Clara stood at the edge of a building with her children close by, the rifle slung across her back. Her heart pounded, not with fear this time, but with determination. This was the moment she had prepared for. Every day of hiding, every step of survival, every lesson she had taught her children had led to this point. Today they would reclaim what remained of their home and ensure their safety in the place they had once loved. She led the children cautiously through the streets, scanning the ruins for signs of danger. The town was eerily quiet. Smoke rose from smoldering piles of debris, and the air was heavy with ash. Clara's eyes swept over every corner, every alley, every doorway. She had no way of knowing if anyone else remained. Perhaps looters, perhaps travelers, perhaps nothing at all. She kept her children close, whispering instructions in calm tones. "Stay behind me. Move quietly. Watch carefully." The children nodded, trusting her completely. They entered what had once been a small marketplace. The stalls were reduced to skeletal frames, and goods were scattered and ruined. Clara carefully searched the area, keeping an eye out for hazards. She found a few intact items, some dried grains in containers, a small tin of preserved fruit, and a sturdy basket. She handed each child a small piece of food to keep their energy up. "Eat quickly, but quietly," she instructed, and they obeyed, understanding the seriousness of the moment. She checked each building along the main street, finding some structures still standing, though damaged. She salvaged tools, blankets, and whatever else could be useful for survival. She kept her rifle close, ready to protect her family if anyone appeared. The children followed closely, helping carry small items and learning from her cautious movements. Every step was deliberate, every observation intentional. Clara knew that one mistake could put them all at risk. As they moved deeper into the town, Clara noticed a faint trail of footprints in the ash. Someone had been here recently, perhaps scavenging or seeking shelter. Her heart beat faster. The town might not be empty, and she had to prepare for confrontation. She whispered to the children to stay silent and close, and adjusted her grip on the rifle. She had never wanted to harm anyone, but she would defend her family if necessary. The thought steeled her nerves. They reached a building that had once been their home. The walls were blackened, the roof partially collapsed, and the windows were gone. Clara felt a wave of sorrow, but she pushed it aside. Her children needed her strength more than ever. She carefully led them inside, checking for structural dangers. The floor creaked under her weight, but it held. She set down the bundles of supplies and motioned for the children to rest while she inspected further. Inside, she found remnants of their previous life. A charred chair, a partially burned blanket, and some scattered personal items. She salvaged what she could, finding a small photo of her late husband, intact despite the fire. Clara held it to her chest, feeling a mixture of grief and resolve. This was proof that life had existed here, that memories still mattered, and that they could rebuild. She placed the photo safely in her bundle and returned to the children. offering words of reassurance. We are safe. We are together, and we will rebuild, one step at a time. Clara spent the next hours carefully securing the building as best she could. She cleared debris to make a small living space for the children, set up blankets for them to rest on, and used salvaged tools to reinforce weak points in the structure. She kept the rifle within reach at all times, a silent reminder of the protection she could provide. Her children watched, absorbing her strength and learning resilience from her actions. As evening approached, Clara knew she had to assess the larger town for any other survivors or potential threats. She moved slowly, scanning the horizon and streets for any signs of movement. The town was still mostly quiet, but she remained alert. She led the children to a higher vantage point, a small hill overlooking the main street. From there she could see the extent of the destruction and plan the next steps. The sight of the burned town was sobering, but Clara did not allow despair to take hold. She pointed out landmarks to the children, explaining where each had been before the fire. She used this opportunity to teach them about observation, awareness, and cautious planning. See the open field? That's where we moved last time. The large oak? That's where we can watch safely. Always remember your surroundings. The children listened intently, understanding that their mother's guidance was their shield in this uncertain world. As night fell, Clara prepared a small meal with the salvaged provisions. They ate quietly, the children tired but reassured by the presence of their mother and the sense of progress they had made. Clara spoke to them about courage, about the importance of hope, and about the power of standing together. She reminded them that they had faced danger and survived, and that together they could face whatever remained. The children felt a sense of pride and trust, knowing their mother would never abandon them. That night, Clara kept a watchful eye. She sat with the rifle close, listening to every sound: the wind through broken walls, the distant crackle of smoldering wood, the occasional call of a night bird. She reflected on the journey that had brought them here. Fleeing the fire, surviving in the forest, and now returning to the town. Every step had required courage, planning, and resilience. Every day had been a test of strength, and Clara had passed them all. In the days that followed, Clara focused on rebuilding small parts of their home. She cleared rubble from the main living area, patched weak walls with salvaged wood, and reinforced the remaining roof as best she could. The children helped where they could, gathering small items, carrying light tools, and learning the value of patience and effort. Clara taught them how to be careful with fire, how to recognize hazards, and how to remain calm in the face of uncertainty. Each day brought small victories, finding a safe patch of ground, salvaging food, securing a wall, and with each victory their confidence grew. Clara also began to establish routines. Mornings were for gathering food, water, and supplies. Afternoons for repairing structures and teaching the children skills. Evenings for stories, reflection, and rest. The rhythm of daily life gave them stability and a sense of normalcy amid the ruins. Clara encouraged the children to take pride in their efforts and to understand that they were not victims of circumstance, but survivors, shaping their future. One afternoon, while exploring a nearby building, Clara found evidence that some townspeople had returned briefly. Footprints, small remnants of belongings, and signs of temporary fires. She realized that others had survived and might also need help. Clara considered reaching out to them but decided it would be safest to focus on her children first. Their safety and security were paramount. She made a mental note to help others when it could be done without putting her family at risk. Weeks passed and Clara's efforts began to bear fruit. The building they had chosen as shelter was more secure, with a small garden patch nearby providing edible plants. Water was available from a nearby stream, and they had enough tools and provisions to maintain a basic level of comfort. The children were healthier and stronger, their spirits lifted by the routine and the sense of accomplishment. Clara felt a quiet pride, knowing that they had survived, learned, and grown stronger together. Clara also reflected on her own growth. She had faced fear, exhaustion, and uncertainty, yet she had not faltered. She had protected her children, reclaimed a small part of their home, and begun the process of rebuilding their lives. The fire had been a terrible loss, but it had also revealed her resilience, her courage, and her determination. She had learned that strength was not about avoiding danger, but about facing it and acting with purpose. One morning, Clara gathered the children and spoke to them about the future. "We have made it this far," she said. "We have survived, we have learned, and we have grown. Now we can begin to rebuild more than just our home. We can rebuild our lives, together." The children listened, understanding that the journey had not ended, but that they were capable of facing whatever lay ahead. Clara's words were not just guidance. They were a promise, a vow to protect, nurture, and lead them through any challenge. In the months that followed, Clara continued to work tirelessly. She repaired more of the building, established small gardens, and ensured that children learned the skills they would need for survival. The rifle remained a symbol of protection, but her focus was on teaching courage, resilience, and the importance of family. She instilled in them a sense of agency. They were not helpless, and they could influence their own future. Eventually, the ruins of Maplewood became not just a place of loss, but a place of growth. Clara's children learned to move through the town safely, to gather resources, and to understand the lessons of survival. Clara herself found a deep sense of satisfaction in knowing that, despite the fire, the loss, and the fear, her family had survived and thrived. They had returned, not as victims, but as a unit bound by courage, resilience, and love. Standing on the small porch of the partially repaired home, Clara looked out over the town. The smoke had faded, the ruins were quiet, and the future stretched before them, uncertain but full of possibility. She held the rifle loosely at her side, not as a weapon of violence, but as a symbol of protection and determination. Her children played nearby, their laughter a gentle reminder that life continued, even after tragedy. Clara smiled, feeling a quiet pride in all they had endured and achieved. They had fled the fire, survived the forest, returned to a destroyed town, and begun to reclaim their lives. Clara had kept her promise to herself and to her children. They were safe, they were strong, and together they could face whatever came next.